you being here.
My pleasure, sir.
My pleasure. So let's talk some sales.
Absolutely.
The reason I want to talk with you specifically is because I've had a working relationship. This is Andrew. I'll let you introduce yourself. You know me.
But do you know you? My name is Andrew Linglebach. I'm a fitness professional working in the Baltimore metro area. I have a proven track record of a good performance in sales in the industry. In fact, last year I cranked out over $100,000 in sales for fitness programs. So here I am. Hopefully I can teach you a thing or two.
Cool. And I think this is really good for someone to get a different, because there's different styles. There are different styles of sales and approaches, and it's not to say mine. If you take the common denominators of how you sell and how I sell, they're probably going to be pretty coherent, pretty congruent, but I have a way of doing it, you've got a way of doing it, and we kind of intersect and cross over, I
You've got a favorite flavor of ice cream, I've got a favorite flavor of ice cream, but it's both ice cream.
Yes. But we had an interesting conversation yesterday, so Andrew and I were training a young Padawan, if you will, and we just had a very interesting conversation. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting for an audience to understand and to hear sort of the organic conversation we had yesterday, and just about sales, his style, my style, different pieces of advice that we would give to somebody new or not new, just to salespeople in general, and also specifically in the health and wellness industry. We talked a lot yesterday about behavior modification and the approach to sales from that perspective, and also the way you were breaking it down for him was, I thought, pretty unique because I hadn't thought of it in that way.
Right, so I like to approach it in more of a physical assessment, and we were speaking specifically on when and where to introduce the Pre-Activity Questionnaire, or the PARQ, if you're familiar with it in the industry.
Needs analysis, essentially.
Mm-hmm. General medical history, as I like to put it, the if you die, it's not my fault clauses. And where to tie that into the sales presentation. How to not only use something as simple as that as a tool for your sales, but also how to weave it into the remainder of your presentation. One of the things we had talked about, and again, Jason and I, we have a very similar concept, a similar direction that we like to take our presentation, but the way we take that direction can be quite different. In the past, have you discussed much on kind of your strategy, your style?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Quite a bit.
Good. So Jason has that very, again, that behavioral approach to it. He looks at the kind of mental whys that a person is.
And a key to point out, emotional.
Emotional, yes. Yeah. And that's where you really see the two tie in. The behavioral and the mental whys that a person does something and how that elicit emotional response. While what I do is I take the physical approach, looking to garner particular physical limitations in an individual, and then tie that to an emotional response. I like to use something called the functional movement screening system. It's a 7-part movement screen. There's lots of movement screenings, and really any of them are an effective sales tool. I just happen to use the functional movement screening because it's laid out very nicely. It has some nice marketing and pictures and images that I can put along with it. But I like to use this screening as a means to quickly overcome a physical barrier that a potential client may have, so that they can see the benefit of why working with a trainer is very, very important. And similar to Jason's behavioral approach, where he works through behavioral hiccups, where he finds and kind of finds excuses and reasons as to why a person doesn't think a fitness program is applicable to them, but then piggyback on something they had said earlier. I kind of do the same thing, where a physical limitation can come off as a barrier, but with a simple remedy we can recognize that it's really not a barrier. It's really just an and attempt to not want to progress in a positive way.
I think anything that any craft that you're trying to hone, whether it's sales, whether it's a sport, whether it's an instrument, first of all, we always talk about the fundamentals, and that's always your foundation, but you have to add tools to your toolbox. So your goal should be to add a plethora of different tools, and you need to have the experience to know when to use which tool when. So Andrew might prefer to use this tool. I might prefer to use this tool. You can't argue results. If that works for you, that works for you. But the knowing what tool to use when is really the key. And it's never a bad thing to add more tools, add more weapons to your sheath, but you need to know when to utilize them and which person. Okay, I've seen this before. I've seen this pattern before. I recognize it. Now, what do I do? What tool would help them understand best or help motivate them most? I think yesterday we were talking about you tend to use the functional movement screening. I do as well, but I kind of use it in a different way. I use it more toward the end of my presentation after I've already sold them, because at that point I want to use.
I would definitely say that we both use aspects of one another's kind of go-to sales technique.
Mm-hmm.
At no point would you just completely forego an individual's physicality,
right, and
at no point would you just completely forego an individual's mental state.
100%.
I think to completely ignore either would be a very, very foolish and rigid sales process that ultimately is not going to lead to effectiveness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the old Bruce Lee philosophy, right? So you discard what doesn't work and you keep what works, and you flow like water. In other words, let the situation and the person dictate what you use, how you utilize it, and don't be so rigid. Flow with it. What does this person need? And then given the tools in your tool belt, okay, what's going to help them best right now? What's going to help you leverage their emotion right now so that they stop procrastinating, that they take action right now, and they take control of their lives, and you're the one guiding them. That's really, I think that's what it comes down to. In a nutshell.
And kind of piggybacking off of that idea of having multiple tools in your toolkit, but still specializing in one. If you go to any construction site across America, you're going to have your guy with the jackhammer, you're going to have your guy with the power drill, you're going to have your guy with the cement mixer. And they may specialize in each of those, but I can almost guarantee if one called in sick one day, someone else could step in his place and still get the job done well enough. I think the toolkit you have for sales can function in the same manner. You should be able to approach the same basic technique in multiple directions, and you can still have a favorite or a go-to or one that you're most confident in presenting. A huge part of sales is being confident in what you're presenting. I'm coming from a very a college-educated background in exercise science that focused heavily on anatomy. So I'm very, very comfortable speaking anatomy. I'm very, very comfortable going through that physicality route, the functional movement screening. And so that is why that is my go-to comfortable process through the sales process. Jason has been speaking to people forever. And Jason knows how the human mind works. And again, it's the same thing. I would argue that's probably, that behavioral analysis that you like to go through is probably your most comfortable route. It's probably your most confident route.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, like you said, you have to blend the two. There's never a time where I use just one thing. I usually blend things, but I'll find, you probably speak to this yourself, there's a certain structure I use. Within that structure, there's all sorts of flexibility, but there's certain things that I do every time because I know that if I don't do those, I'm going to shortcut it, the process. You can't shortcut the process. Right. And then through that, I might say, okay, this physical assessment or this tool or the physicality part of it would be appropriate for this person in this scenario, in addition to all the other stuff that I always do anyway. I just think my philosophy has always been, you don't want to rely on, you want to be good enough that you can deal or manage any situation regardless. What I always say, you should be able to close anybody, anywhere, at any time, given any circumstances. If that's your goal, that should be the goal. You should be able to try to hone your craft so you're good enough in any situation to do it, even though you know what works best for you or what is ideal for the client.
Right, and bouncing off of being able to work outside of your go-to is incredibly important. The functional movement screening absolutely has its limitations. There's 3 motions that require an individual to be on the floor, and I have had a multitude of prospects who have gone through and purchased training that couldn't get on the floor unassisted or perform any of those motions on the floor the first day I met them. And it would have been incredibly, from a sales perspective, it would have been a turnoff to ask them to get on the floor. That a person would not receive that effectively if I tried to get them to get into a position that was clearly outside of their scope of ability.
I think somebody said yesterday, going back to the FMS, Andrew likes to use FMS. Really what we're trying to get at is you kind of want to show them using tools, or I like to do visuals a lot, to show them without having to tell them, hey, look, hey, you got some work to do. Hey, or hey, you know, your doctor might not tell you this, but this may not be the healthiest thing, or you're not moving well, whatever the case may be. Different tools for different things. Me personally, I don't like to take them out of the office initially, run them on the ground, on the floor. I don't like doing that initially. I want to get emotional. I want to create a bond. I want to create a relationship. I want to create a connection. I want to get to know them on a personal level, and I want to understand what makes that person tick. And that, to me, is going to take the process where it needs to go to. The tool that I use most often, that is super easy, without having, I use this body fat analyzer right here, and super simple. It's fairly accurate for the most part. It's accurate enough. It's also not dehydrated. It's going to be basically as accurate as a caliper most of the time. And the caliper is, of course, I don't particularly like to use that the first time I meet someone because it is very invasive.
No one usually wants to strip down the first time.
Hey, let's go ahead and pinch your back. That'll be nice. But so I use this, and what's so great about it, it takes 10 seconds to do. I can write down on paper. I can tell them before they even do it, this is why we pay attention to body fat and not just weight. And I explain to them that process, and through that stems 8 other conversations that are beneficial to the sale. And then on top of it, then I can show them a visual, show them a chart of where they lie. You have your red where you're obese, you have your green, or your yellow, which is average, and you have your green, which is above average or good, and then you have, or ideal rather, and then you have below average, which is really lean. And they can see where they are on the chart. Any personal trainer will tell you in most gyms, people that come in, your demographic is going to lean more towards high side average or obese. Sadly, but it's true.
That's all of America.
All of America. So if you see that on paper, you can see the change in their face. They know without you having to say anything. And then you can just encourage them at that point. It doesn't have to be a negative conversation. It's more about, oh, that's all right. You got to start somewhere. Well, now you see it. We're going to drag you kicking and screaming out of this red. And this is our first goal here, and then this is going to be our ideal goal. So as long as we're in that range, we're good. It can take us roughly this amount of time, so you can give them some sort of idea, and you can take that any direction you want to, but it's really good because it causes an emotion, and it's a physical tool, so using some of that, it's not too invasive at all, and you can talk about the body fat as opposed to the weight. So it gives you all sorts of opportunities to talk about or take the conversation where it should go to make it positive and to help teach them something, help them arrive at a conclusion that's beneficial for them and you.
And I think kind of a really great thing about using bioelectrical impedance or the FMS screening, both take the conversation away from the scale. And for long-term fitness sales, the scale is not how you want to try to make your sales, because the scale is a dirty, dirty liar.
It is very misleading.
Yeah, the scale and BMI measurements are very, very rarely an effective way to have the conversation go with the person. Again, especially in the long term. Right now, we're talking, that initial interaction, those prospects. But for retention's sake, having an individual focused on a scale, both just simply as a scientific measurement tool, but also just the war on the scale we're experiencing right now, I think is a great reason to try to step away from that as as a go-to sales technique.
Yeah, I in fact, that's one of the first things I call out when we talk about weight, because when I do a needs analysis, the weight's going to show up. When I start to talk about physical assessments, I tell them up front, we're not going to do a whole lot of physical assessments to start with, but we're going to do a lot of them in the big picture because we're trying to make a science out of this. We don't want to be doing guesswork. We know where guesswork's going to lead us. We want to make this a science. We know if we do X plus Y, we're going to get Z as a result, and we're going to take the doubt out of it. So if you've had problems with doing this before, most people have. What's going to be different this time? Well, we're going to make it a science for one thing. We're going to start from the ground up using these assessments, whether it's a functional movement screening or otherwise, to help guide us and to give us a starting point. Okay, you don't move well. Your movement patterns are poor. You have muscle imbalances. Okay, let's correct those literally from the feet up, and let's progress you through the scientific methodology that is personal training.
So we're talking an awful lot about working with prospectives and new clients. What do you think? How do you think some of these strategies can lead towards retention?
Great question. So, really good question. So, retention is a sale. In fact, every interaction is a sale. So we'll start there. So, when I meet someone, let's say I met you at the front desk. Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
That's
I'm
a sale.
Andrew.
They're buying me. At the end of the day, the sale is they're buying you or they're not buying you. So don't let it fool you. It's not the gym. It's not your program. It's you, first and foremost. So that's a sale. Getting them to show up, if I've communicated with them via phone or email or anything else, that's a sale. Getting them to show. Keeping in contact with, obviously the sale is a sale. Following up with them, keeping them encouraged is a sale. Andrew does a fantastic job. In fact, that's one of the main reasons I want to have him on, because we've worked in tandem for many years, and I set him up for him and knock him down, and then he retains them forever, basically. And that's a sale within itself. In fact, the sale is not done. So many fitness professionals think, "Oh my God, I got a sale. Sale's over." The sale has just begun when you get them to sign on the dotted line. Then it becomes, can I retain this person? Can I continue to sell them on coming in, sell themselves on maintaining a program, being consistent, eating the right way? There's so many facets to it.
Will this person
sales.
refer others to me?
Buddy referrals, absolutely. So all that is sales. So in terms of member retention, the tools we talked about are just as useful, maybe more so at this point, because now what you can do is you can leverage those tools. If you did it properly at the beginning, you have a nice baseline of where they should be, and now you can show them how it's working. And what I find is very helpful, and you are the retention master here, what I find is very helpful is if you give them a game plan, show them the big plan up front. So in other words, there's different phases of training, clearly. If you can show them what's coming up and give an appetizer what's coming up before, and you drop that seed, before you go to re-sign them, for example, or retain them, or before they get bored, before you have to get through that process where they're sort of getting complacent and they're getting sort of frustrated, if you can show them where they're going and there's a reason and a rhyme and a reason for why they're doing it, that, again, that's a sale. You're dropping a seed. This is what we're doing next. This is what's coming up down the pipeline. We're in this phase now, but this phase is going to look a little different. We're going to lift differently, different planes of motion, different types of exercises, different rep range. You might even be eating differently. But the point is that now we're going to take into another. You can't do this without us. What are you going to do? You're going to another progression. What are you going to do now? So without having to tell them that, if you show them the big picture, now they're like, oh, I get it, without you having to say, look, I think you should spend more money on me.
And I think something to work off of Jason's ideas with showing them this is where we're going next, this is what's next, this is what's around the corner, having them be a part of that is key. I find that for long-term retention success, if you speak to any of my clients, we sit down roughly every 2 months for about 15 minutes at the end of a session, and I say, and that's a great thing, it really doesn't take a tremendous amount of work to get this type of buy-in from them, but 15 minutes, and I approach them very humbly and saying, this is the direction I'd like to go. I feel like we've gotten this far, but where do you feel like we haven't gotten? Suddenly, when you approach them with that humility, they recognize, one, you care. When they realize you care, it's a sale right there. Mm-hmm. Immediately, the fact that you're asking them questions. But then on top of that, you give them the opportunity to make it their journey, as opposed to where you are taking them, it's where they are going. Mm-hmm. And I think that is huge, because the moment they have, in psychology, it's autonomy. You know, the concept that you have control over what you do. The moment you say, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? With my professional guidance, it's hook, line, and sinker. They are 100% on board because they recognize that they're the ones steering the ship. You're just paddling for them.
And I often use the pronoun we and our.
Yes.
It's our journey
Yes.
together. In fact, the first time I meet them, everything is we and our, because this is a team effort. I'm there to guide them. Ultimately, they're the ones. And when it comes to sales, I want them to understand that I'm conducting this presentation, if you will. I'm steering the ship, no question, but it's their boat, if that makes sense. So if they don't care about their boat as much as I do, that's a problem. So I'm going to help steer that ship. I'm going to be their rudder. But ultimately, it's their boat. I want them to take it just as seriously as I am. And then when you give them that ownership, while saying we're doing this as a team, to Andrew's point, it's usually a done deal.
Absolutely. And something that I have found very surprising, working with clients. Again, I've been where I am now for 5 years, and I've been in fitness, wellness, and recreation for nearly 10 years. The amount of people that get surprised when they have a fitness professional wanting them to make decisions on where they go really blows their mind. Because unfortunately, and Jason and I were just discussing this the other day, I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder trying to prove that I'm just not a professional.
Because you're small.
Right, exactly. That just to prove that I'm not a professional meathead. That I actually care, that I know what I'm talking about, that I recognize
You're well schooled, if you will.
Thank you.
Yes.
That I recognize how human behavior functions. And unfortunately, I would say our industry is polluted with a lot of people who get away with just having a nice physique.
Well, that's actually that's 100% true. And you also see it in terms of how we're perceived as trainers compared
Absolutely.
to, say, a physical therapist or a massage therapist, where they're doing a lot of the same things. I mean, they're kissing cousins to our profession. But I think in terms of public perception, it's probably perceived as a little higher up on the food chain.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's an excellent way to say it. Honestly, I personally believe that it has a lot to do with the lack of regulation in our industry. If we were a more heavily regulated industry, we would be licensed. We wouldn't be certified. We have just as much, if not more, capacity to injure a person than, say, a dentist.
Sure.
But I feel as though that the slightest extra step will absolutely set you leaps and bounds above any other experience an individual has ever had in fitness.
I agree. It's the small things that make a huge difference, because it's the extra step that the average person does not feel like going through. Or maybe they don't even know what they don't know. But that's the difference between separate someone who's a great salesperson. Because, again, people think sales is manipulation. Sales is service. That's the difference. Sales is service. You want to see where the best... If you want to make a decision, if you're an owner or a manager or someone who makes decisions in your club, and you want to get a good idea of what your club wants, yeah, you can do surveys and you can do online platforms and all that, and that's fine. You should take that into account, absolutely.
Yeah, toolkit.
Right, that's your toolkit. Take that into account. But you want to know really quickly, look at what people are buying. People make decisions. In other words, people tell you what they like based on their buying habits. If they're buying a certain trainer, well, what is it that trainer's doing? They're spending money on that trainer. They're telling you what they like, by the way. They're not going to invest in something they don't like. Does that make sense? I mean, they may not like training that much, but they're going to like the results of it. So that's part of it. And I think a lot of times we overcomplicate things. Sales is service. If you have somebody who's selling very well in your clubs, I always say when I go into different clubs and look at different organizations, who are the top salespeople, what are they doing? And if these people are not selling, it has nothing to do with pressure, not pressure, what have you. And it doesn't mean that person who's selling 60% is adding a lot of pressure, being manipulative, and this person over here who's selling 20% and couldn't sell it out of a paper bag isn't applying pressure. It means that this person is offering more service and more expertise and making that client happier than this person is. That's all that means. And I think the tendency, we were talking about this today also, I think it's a really good point. The tendency is for a lot of organizations is, let's go ahead and look at the squeaky wheels, in terms of member satisfaction, client satisfaction. okay, you have, let's say, I don't know, 70% are completely happy and they're, oh, it's great or whatever, and usually they don't say a word. Unfortunately, they don't say a word,
let's
right?
let's say we have 10 people, 7 are happy, they're not saying anything. 2 people are extremely happy and say something, and then there's one unhappy person just going nuts. It's the vocal minority.
Yep. And what I tell people is most organizations, what to do, or a lot of them, will focus on that squeaky 1 or 2 people, or that percentage, that 10 to 20% that is unhappy, and they'll try to make changes and make decisions in the club based off of that very small population. And I say no, because first of all, 1 out of those 2 people, you're never going to please no matter what. So you can just throw that off. It doesn't make any difference. And the other one is, something unfortunate might have happened, but you can't please everybody, sort of thing. You're certainly not going to make a decision on that 1 or that 10% that it's going to affect, maybe make 20% of the happy people unhappy. Why not double down on what is already making people happy? Figure out what they liked about what you're doing, what those salespeople are doing to make them happy. See where their money goes, where are these people spending money, who's responsible for these people buying, and then double down on that and make more people happy, or at least keep the ones you already have happy. So you don't have to go chasing your tail and having to bring in more people all the time. Just keep the ones you already have. It's a good, if you've been in business for a while, it's a good bet you have a lot of them right now. What if you just kept those people?
And
right?
Right, and kind of to piggyback off the idea of trying to appease that squeaky wheel, sometimes that squeaky wheel doesn't know what it's talking about.
Correct.
Sometimes that squeaky wheel doesn't understand what actually is and isn't important. The reason why that squeaky wheel is coming to us is because they don't understand fitness. If they or they don't have the capacity, the tool set, the space, they don't understand what's underneath the hood of the car that they're driving. It is here at the gym. Again, the squeaky wheel doesn't understand how a gym needs to function. There's aspects of a fitness facility that need to run a certain way that they'll never see.
I'll give an example. I was speaking with somebody who made decisions in a gym, or was part of that decision-making process. And I walked around with this person asking the members. We just asked a couple people, what I think one of the questions was, when you came in to first join this club or to look at it for the first time, what was your first impression? Would you prefer that someone took you on a tour or didn't take you on a tour? Well, it wasn't a very big sample size. It was only a couple people. But as I told the person that I was talking to, I have a huge sample size in here. It's called thousands and thousands of presentations and tours. Okay, so there's a big sample size there. There's pattern recognition. But beyond that, she's like, that was so interesting because they both said, now, give you the demographic. One was an older guy, I wouldn't say older, but middle-aged, probably in his mid to late 50s. And the other one was a young guy, probably 22. Okay, so you can they work out in the gym, doing their thing. And they said, yeah, wouldn't even really need a tour. I didn't really need a tour. I wouldn't really like it. And she thought it was so interesting. I was like, well, I didn't find it that compelling, to be honest, because I thought, A, it was a very small sample size, and it was not very surprising, because what 20-some-year-old guy or what middle-aged guy wants somebody showing them around? They're probably going to want to do their own thing. They want to be autonomous. They want to go, and they don't even know what they don't know. Okay, that's the first thing. But the thing that I thought was more important, and I told her this, look, it's almost, the best analogy I can give you is almost like dating a beautiful woman. Okay, or beautiful women. If you put this on paper and you say, what is the type of guy that you want in your life? I want a really nice guy. You've heard this before. That might be true, but in action, in practical life, do they respond to that? Many do not, in other words. So we know that that's what they may want or think that they want, but they don't necessarily respond to it. So they may not get what they really want. They're not attracted to that. So in this case...
just as a side note, I would even say men are the same way.
Sure.
Men claim to want a nice, polite, a ladylike person, but crazy's a little crazy is hot.
Well, yeah, but you get my point. I agree with you. But the whole point was that, if you gave them what they wanted, they're not going to buy, and they're not going to stick with the program anyway. So sometimes you have to tell them what they want to hear, not in a manipulative way, and then give them what they actually need, and then they're appreciative of it. Does that make sense? Of course you have to tour someone.
Put
of course
their
you have to
peas
show them.
in their mashed potatoes.
Right.
Put their peas in their mashed
Because
potatoes.
if you gave everybody a choice, everyone would come and use the gym for a couple weeks and you never see them again, and they would never pay anything. Right? Does that make sense? So you have to help them help themselves. The only way you can truly do that, you can't automate that. You have to create a personal relationship. So there's no shortcutting that. I don't care what you do technological.
Don't hurt yourself.
I don't care what you do with technology. You cannot automate that. You need to have that personal connection. The only way to do that is to spend time with them, whether it's on tour or what have you. The tour is just an excuse to spend time with them. Find their driving wants. Find their pain points. Figure out what you can help them with. Try to figure out what concerns they have, and then crush those concerns before you ever sit down with them to price present or to close. So that's what it's about. And I think that we get caught up in making things so complicated. It's really not that complicated. You're creating a relationship with somebody. You're creating a connection with somebody. You're unraveling their layers, if you will. And if you can make it about that, and you had no skill set developed whatsoever, and you have a decent personality, you're enthusiastic, and you believe in what you sell, you're going to be better than your average salesperson right there. Because that's the nuts and bolts of what you're trying to do. That's your foundation. But the reason why I brought that up is because she was very, very surprised about this, and I was like, you obviously have to tour these people. You can't just cut that off because, of course, everyone thinks they know what they need. I probably think I know what I need with my car. Or you might think you know what you need with your finances. Do you really? If you weren't trained in it, probably not. Probably not. There's a reason he went to school for this.
I like to think of let's say you have a job to do at your house. You're replacing a light fixture. You're retiling your bathroom. Could you do it yourself? Yeah, probably. Is it a better idea to hire a contractor? Absolutely. Can you kind of muddle your way through it? More than likely, but wouldn't you rather have it be a professional job? Wouldn't you rather have it be done faster, more effectively, more efficiently?
Somebody who's done it for years.
Exactly. So it's someone who's not going to mess up halfway through and then it's just ruined, or start from scratch, or take even more time or more resources in the long run because you have to start.
You know, like my foot operated on. Jim down the street, I heard he patched himself up once.
Yeah, he's got a table saw.
It's just no problem. How hard can it be? No big deal.
Exactly.
You being the, I would say, retention specialist, as I said, our relationship is I close the deal, hand it off to Andrew. I've done this many times before. Andrew does this, and I feel very confident handing off to Andrew because I know he's not going to drop the ball. He's going to be professional and take care of the client, at least semi-professional. Take care of the client. The client's going to be, not only are they going to be serviced well, but they're going to be entertained. He might walk on his hands, he might swallow swords, set his hair on fire, God only knows. But they're not going to be bored. And I know that they're getting the best possible trainer, and it's not going to come back and make us look unprofessional in any way, shape, or form. So that's the relationship that I've had with Andrew in the past. And the idea is that if I give it to him or any other competent trainer, they understand that I'm handing them the sale. And now that sale is not stopped, it's just started. And now it's their job to make sure that they retain them, which is another word for sale. So they have to continue that sales process so they retain them. So that being said, you have a trainer in front of you, or any fitness professional for that matter, that's involved in the sales process. If there was one or two bits of advice you think would be the most significant as far as retention is concerned, what would those pieces of advice be in closing?
Specifically for retention, especially on an individual fitness professional basis. So let's say you're a trainer or you're a fitness director looking to develop your staff, or even a general manager of a small fitness club. One of the most important things I would say is, number one, have an honest care for the individual. And that is where a lot of this retention comes from. Because that honest care in a person is going to show itself in the service you provide that person. And again, sales is a portion of that service. Is it the most glamorous or the most fun? Not necessarily always, but it is a very, very valuable part of servicing a member.
Sound familiar, any of this? Keep going, sir.
Number two, stay sharp. If you want to be the best that person can be, you need to actively seek to be the best. You need to ask others what they need to do to improve. An excellent example is I come to Jason and I say, Jason, I've had this issue here, or I've been trying to develop this. What are some strategies you have? Just because you may have strengths that one person has or another person has strengths or personality that's different from yours doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have something to offer you. Be humble with the information you're hunting down.
I come to Andrew, I have in the past many times, especially for the personal training part, because Andrew started in the personal training side of things, exercise science, he came from that background. My background, I've always been an athlete, I've always worked out, but my background was actually in sales, it was in communication, it was in psychology. So that's where I started, that was my base, and then I got introduced to the personal training aspect of it a little bit later. So then I'm bringing that phase of it in, and then those two work very well together. Where was I going with that?
I'm not sure. But I would say the third and probably final and most important part, and this was easily, this kind of clicked with me probably my second year working at this facility I'm at now, is the sales process is a win-win situation for both parties. If you are an individual fitness professional or if you are selling fitness program for someone else, the person you are performing this transaction with values that service more than their money, and you value their money more than your time or the time of the person that you will have servicing them. Everyone wins at the end of a sales transaction.
Correct.
And I like to emphasize that if a person doesn't want to seek service, they'll say no. There's no gun to their head. But at the end of the day, it's a win-win for both parties. And that is, I think, you'll find that a lot of people going into fitness are very empathetic people, and they have a lot. We all have a story. We all have a reason why we do. Exercise isn't fun, so there's always that kind of, why does a person want to do that? So we have this different spark in us. But recognizing that is what kind of switched me over from not only a fitness professional, but essentially my own small business owner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great way of looking at it. I mean, it really is. If you're a personal trainer, you work, even if you're working for another company, it's still your personal business. One last thing, I want to get your take on this. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. It just pops in my head. I don't want to neglect it.
Sure.
I think one of the classic rookie, specifically for a trainer, but this happens with any salesperson in the fitness profession, you tend to want to or gravitate towards, since your background, and you might have experienced this when you were coming up also before you got into sales aspect of it, but there's no way to perform this job without having to do sales. You're selling yourself and nothing else. So you might as well get good at it. And what I find that is, especially when it comes from his background as opposed to mine, he wants to throw, not speaking for you, but the default is to throw a lot of science at somebody, make it very complicated, kind of default to, this is what we're doing here, and then you throw a lot of anatomy terms, and in the meantime, they don't really care. Some of them might, but most of them are just confused, and again, no one buys when they're confused. What do you have to say to that?
Think about anywhere you go. If someone was just throwing big words at you to try to get you to partake in something or do something, if you went to a restaurant and they told you all the ingredients in the dish, is that going to be a selling point? No. The taste of the dish, the smell,
the sizzle,
the sound,
the
steak. All of these very primal, tactile sensations.
The reptilian brain at work.
Exactly.
And it really is. That's
right.
Truly what's happening.
All these primal sensations you have to the food is what's going to make you want to get the food, not the 15 ingredients that went into the pot.
Correct.
The way it sounds, the way it smells, the way it tastes, the way it looks, not the order you put the pasta in, followed by the sauce, and then X amount of spices, Y amount of seasonings. That's not an interesting part to it.
Get back to, rather than focus on that, try to focus on the person. Their emotions, why they're doing it, they're driving what, as we always say, building value, building commitment, talking about fitness. So if you talk about the goals, you talk about the fitness, you don't care, you don't talk about price, you don't sell them price or deals, you sell them fitness, their commitment, and find their emotional hop on why this is so important for them, and focus on those areas, you'll be just fine. All the other stuff are just tools to use when you need them, but you have to do those other things, the emotional part of it, and the intake and all that. You have to do that no matter what. That's not negotiable. You have to do that if you're going to make it work. Well, as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the best in the business.
Thank
so
you.
I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And I'm sure
Thank you
they
very
do. So
much.
you've been fantastic, my friend.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Until next time.
Be well.